Okay, we're going to try a couple of things in this session, so we're going to apologize right up front if it doesn't work. But first of all, we're going to try to handle some of the questions. We're going to try to do some of this together, and we're also going to try to get some of our messages across, which I think brings sort of a summary to a lot of the great things that we've heard so far. So let me make sure some of this is working. By the way, we're using some incredible technology here called Google Presentation. Let me give you a few warnings. There's like the Q&A function only lasts for about 20 minutes, so don't count on that QR code lasting for very long. So send up your questions, and we'll get started on our presentation, and I'll do my best to try to integrate them in. Okay? So first of all, I'm going to ask a question for Randy. Randy, you're this famous guy. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I'm the non-famous guy up here. Randy's the famous guy. Okay? And you're a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
What did you do before that?
Oh. Well, it's a long, checkered history. I never set out to be a venture capitalist. I actually started my career in public service. I worked for a city doing community development in eastern United States, New England. And at the same time, I also taught economics in a small college in New England. And at the same time, I was a rock promoter. I did all three things at the same time. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years until I went to law school. I became a lawyer, first a trial lawyer, later a business lawyer, and then found my way to Apple Computer, right around the time of the first Macintosh. I worked there for a short period of time and then went off to become an entrepreneur. I created a software company called Claris with a group of friends of mine. I then created another company called Go Corporation with another group of friends of mine in the pen computing space. And then I became the CEO of LucasArts Entertainment for George Lucas. And I ran that for a short while, and then I went off to run another game company as a CEO. And then I got tired of all of that. I decided that I didn't like being a CEO. I really liked the creativity of business, but the day-to-day running of a scaled business was less interesting. So I created a role called virtual CEO. It didn't exist before, but it was a way for me to work with entrepreneurs to help them build their businesses. Essentially a venture capitalist, but without money, but with time. Harvard Business School got a load of what I was doing and wrote a case study about it. And then asked me to write a book, which became The Monk and the Riddle. I did that for a short period of time, and I went to teach at Stanford for about 8 years and did social venture, only social venture investing. And then I went from there to Kleiner Perkins, a very large venture capital firm, to bring my style of investing, this virtual CEO style of building companies, to a broad base of for-profit businesses. And I've been doing that and writing books ever since.
Excellent. I want to hear a little bit more detail about the rock promoter part.
Yeah.
That to me is the most important part of the story.
Well, I was inspired by the house band here. It's great to have a house band. Usually when I speak, I don't have a house band. So this was very, very nice. Well, I was, it was the early 70s, the end of the 60s, and I had graduated from college, and there was the entrepreneurship of the moment was music. And so I went with a group of friends of mine and began to book bands in New England, eastern part of the United States. Eventually started to book large festivals, college campuses, started managing a few bands, and found myself in the music business. What I realized about the music business was it was a lot of fun, but I couldn't make any money. And so I couldn't support myself, but it was probably one of the most fun things I've done in my career. Except for becoming, I was a baker. I was a baker for a while, for about 2 or 3 years. That's the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Good bread?
Yeah. Oh, I can make very good bread, but I can bake lots of things.
Excellent. Now the reason I like that story is because of the fact that so many people that we end up working with here feel like they need to be on a straight path. All right? Now, sometimes they feel like they need to be on a straight path. Sometimes their parents think they need to be on a straight path, but that wasn't a straight path.
Well, at times I felt like I should be on a straight path, too. I was uneasy as a youngster. I didn't have the confidence that I kind of have now, that I can kind of bushwhack my way through anything. But in those days, I really felt like perhaps I was wasting my time or meandering too much. But I couldn't stop myself. I mean, there were just too many things that interested me. And I found that if I made good decisions in the moment around the opportunities in front of me and did it consistent with my values, that they led to opportunities along the way that allowed me to do a variety of things. I wouldn't live life any other way. I mean, my career makes sense only in the rearview mirror, not in the windshield. But I think most of life makes sense in the rearview mirror and not in the windshield. So.
Well, so that leads to one of our lessons. So there's some Thai people out there, right? Okay, so the question, some of you have been in classes with me or training programs with me, you know, how do you say entrepreneur in Thai? ผู้ประกอบการ right? We got our Puyai Ban from Lampang here, okay? So, I mean, the reason this is an important part of the story is because, for me, being an entrepreneur is not a business function, although it may be a set of activities that lead to a very good business. But it's, more importantly, this person who ประกอบ in Thai, ประกอบ is assemble, okay? And actually, you can go all the way back to the French. Any French people in here? Okay, entre, what does entre mean? Everyone says entre means to enter. That's not what entre means. What's entre mean? Between. Entre means to be between. So the entrepreneur is the person who is in between bringing all this stuff together. Okay? And that's why it's important to have this kind of set of experiences that don't necessarily fit together in anyone else's life, but you can bring them together and then find these innovative opportunities. And I just ask everyone who's been here today to think about that and the stories you've been listening to. Okay, you know, Christopher's mix between architecture and music and urban landscapes. Okay, now the reason I want to emphasize this is because my next slide. If you're limiting yourself by your own capabilities, you're really losing opportunities. Okay, so the opportunity for an entrepreneur is not to say, this is what I have, this is what I can do, but who can I bring together to what I'm trying to do? And I'll tell you, in my opinion, the best way to bring people together is to do something big. That's the think big part of our story. Okay, so one of the things that we really want to emphasize is, you know, thinking big, and when you're doing something big and great, a lot of people want to come to you. Okay, so the other question is, why act small then? Okay, and this is actually when we first started to cross paths, okay? Maybe 10 years ago, you had come out with a book, Getting to Plan B, and what was the thinking behind that book?
Yeah, so Getting Plan B was my second book. It was a book I said I'd never write because it's kind of more like a business book. My first book wasn't, even though they called it a business book. It was more of a spiritual book about business. But Getting to Plan B, I felt like I needed to write because so many people were stumbling between big ideas and bold action. And it was necessary to give people a sense of the sequencing of a business, the ability to focus in on the little assumptions, the leaps of faith that you make along the way, and to get good feedback on the way before you committed yourself. So the opportunity was one of solving little problems, bringing together little questions, answering them sequentially, course correcting, and getting to the big idea. And that's how most businesses work. When we did our research for that, I wrote that book with a professor from the London School of Business by the name of John Mullins. When we did our research for that, what we found was that most successful companies did not succeed with their original plan. In fact, 90% plus of successful companies did not succeed with their original plan. They had to discover their business along the way. And that doesn't mean that you can simply lash out without direction. It means that there is a methodical way to take small steps to accomplish big things.
But these 90%, these were, if I remember correctly, companies that Kleiner Perkins had already invested in.
That's right.
Right. So these were companies that are already invested by venture capital and still needed to move on to a plan B or
Absolutely.
C or D.
I mean, Google's a great example. We invested in Google. When we invested in Google, yes, it was a search engine, but it was a search engine that was just a white labeled search engine that every ISP could use. But ultimately, the ISPs decided that search was not that valuable, and so consequently, Google had to figure out how to make money. And that's when they created their own business model around search. But that didn't exist when we invested in them. They had to figure that out, and they figured that out because their original business was actually not working.
Well, in fact, is our speaker Gio Wei here? He's not, okay, because there's a great question for him the same way, and that is, I see out there in the, can someone give him a microphone? Because we have a question from the crowd asking almost the same thing. Now, I apologize if this is an incorrect question. I'm just going to read the question. But how do you do all this stuff in technology when you're not a programmer? Is it true you're not a programmer?
Just second one. Okay, so my background actually architecture and industrial design when I was a student.
Okay.
Actually, and when I graduated, actually I joined Microsoft Research, and before joining, actually doing internship there. So at that time, I actually do coding by myself. So I learned from scratch. So I would say different with a lot of people from education from coding. Actually, my education is not from coding, but I would say design thinking or code thinking should be a very interesting new. How to say a moment for everyone to learn from not only doing but also actually thinking. So that's very important. If you go to see if you manage a very good IT company, you without any how to say program skill, you also can do it. For example, in Alibaba, the CTO of the Alibaba is not actually even a programmer before. He also used to work for Microsoft Research as a vice director. So he actually background is psychology. So there's a lot of example can be shown like that.
Great. So you were an architect, you said? You studied architecture?
Yeah.
Christopher studied architecture? Kun Whipplewee, did you start architecture? Yeah. We're seeing a trend here. We're all studying the wrong stuff to get into innovation entrepreneurship. Okay, that looks great. I mean, in fact, let me throw some terms up here that we teach, and you probably see in a lot of different places. So when we teach this, we call step zero, but design thinking as well. This willingness and ability to explore all the time and to be imagining these fitting these combinations together. I think we saw it also with Brian's talk. The key here is, and I think architects probably get a lot of training in this, but for the rest of us, we kind of have to learn on our own. So if you're out there looking for some stuff, look up design thinking if you haven't already been exposed to that kind of thing. And we say, anyone who's spent any time with me hears me say, explore forever. You know, be imagining all the time these different possibilities. Because to go back to a term that I remember Randy telling me the first time I heard that leap of faith. Okay, what's the importance of a leap of faith when we're innovating?
Well, in the getting to Plan B process, the idea was to first learn the cheapest way and the fastest way possible, which is by the mistakes and the successes of others. But once you've done that, you'll find that there's something that needs to be answered that hasn't been answered before that's unique to your business. And that's the big leap of faith that you're taking. That's where you need to focus your time and attention. That's where you need to remove risk as quickly as possible. And I think to Ed's point, what I have found over the course of my career is to always be a student, to always be learning, and to never assume an answer. Whenever I assume an answer, that's when I actually start to run into trouble. Whenever I'm open to exploring and experimenting to find an answer, that's when I usually find surprises, very, very positive surprises for my business.
So this is another important lesson, I think, and we've got people here from all over the region. So, and I've done enough work, and a number of us have done enough work in countries across the region to know there are some similar themes, and that is we need to think bigger. As I mentioned before, I believe that when we're thinking bigger, we attract a lot of interesting people to what we're doing, but we also need to test. Okay, so this is kind of why we use this slogan both for the symposium and also for the work we do: think big, act small. Now, a lot of times I'll tell people, think big, act small, and they say, oh, no, you're selling us short. You know, we're going to think big, act big, all right? And there are some organizations that do that, but, you know, let me show you an example that I kind of use on that. Just, you know, I applaud big thinking, you know, like you might see in this picture here. Bold experiments. He could have started on a smaller hill. Right? I mean, the boldness was great, but you know, he could have started on a smaller hill. Now you saw he crawled out of it, so it was good. But I mean, if he had an investor behind him, I'm not sure the investor would go on any further with him, okay? So the reason this message is so important is you can actually gain a confidence thinking bigger if you're willing to take these smaller steps, right? You can take this.
In fact, you and I talked about one of the advantages of being in a place like Thailand is how cheap it is to be able to make these small experiments as compared to some place like the United States. And frankly, venture capital can be a curse, not just a blessing, because when lots of venture capital is thrown behind big ideas, you end up with airplanes going off cliffs, because the capital builds a very big cliff. But if you're able to be smart about how you identify your leaps of faith and focus your attention, and how you experiment and measure, you can actually move much more quickly and much more cheaply. And I think places like Bangkok are great places to do that.
Yeah, in fact, that's another thing I want to emphasize. Okay, I'm a foreigner, right? I've been here 25 years, and I love the excitement. I love the chaos that I find Bangkok and in other countries around here. And unfortunately, I mean, a lot of the Thai people I work with are always trying to remove that chaos. And in fact, that chaos is really a good good source of innovation. In fact, I think we saw that in the talk about the flood. And we really want to kind of embrace that as source of opportunities for innovation. I personally, don't tell Randy this, I find Silicon Valley boring. You know, I love Bangkok. Right, we've been traveling a little bit around Yangon and here and stuff. Okay, we're not in California anymore. Okay, which is great. What's that? Okay. So actually, we have a question on that. Is Jagdish still around here? Okay. Because there's a couple questions for our speakers. So, Christopher, somebody wants to know what your next project is. Is there anything in the works that you're working on?
Hello. Let me stand and make this short. I think somebody asked, well, okay, I'm from Boston. I know Tom Brady, American football. Ed doesn't want me to talk about it. But they say, you know, they asked Tom Brady, what's your best game? My next game, right? I have lots of projects that I'm working on, and I'm always, like you guys are talking about, I'm always refining and I'm always making changes. Even last week, this whole past week with SoundStare at UTCC, I made a whole bunch of little tweaks in there that nobody knows about but me. But it took that environment and those conditions and that, what you talk about, open mind, to move the idea a little bit farther forward, right? There actually is a project that I did about 15 years ago with the dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov, which some of you may know, the great male modern dancer. I actually put a heartbeat monitor on him so you could hear the sound of his heartbeat while he danced. Because as a drummer, I thought, when I was at MIT, I thought, you know, everybody has a drum inside. Is there a way I could bring that out and make that part of a performance? And there were some interim steps, but I got all the way to Baryshnikov, and we created the work. I created the work for him. He toured for 2 years, but now I'm about to do a new iteration of it. So that's the next project, but you can see it's a project that I've had on my mind for 30 years. So I sort of like to say that I've never actually thought of a new idea since college. But it doesn't mean that there aren't just lots of things that I'm going back and forth between architecture and music. I'll never run out of ideas. Yeah. And as I said on that last slide that I showed today from your IDE Center, the idea isn't necessarily the most important part, but bringing the idea into reality is what is most difficult and takes the most energy, I find.
By the way, if you want to build stuff, Christopher lives in a playground, which is absolutely a self-built playground, which is incredible. It has a huge sound theater, which he tells me is soundproof, so his kids can play loud music without waking him up, and machine shops, and you've got a battery-powered Porsche in the works and stuff. Just incredible playground. So he's always exploring.
Yeah.
You have to send it through the QR code if you want to ask any questions. Yeah, what about a project at UTCC?
That's my next project.
There you go.
Okay, great, excellent. Somebody anonymously is asking, I don't know if I'm supposed to ask them or ask someone else. They say, how do I train myself to spot the opportunity? So whoever you are, tell us. How do I train myself to spot an opportunity?
How do you miss them? You know, I taught at Stanford for many, many years, and I taught entrepreneurship with a fellow by the name Tom Byers, who ran the program, who's a good friend of Ed's as well. And my goal in teaching entrepreneurship at Stanford was never to help them build a business. Never. It was never important to me to help them build a business. I could have cared less if they built a business. What I cared about is whether they could spot opportunities in their lives, in their careers, and whether they could address those opportunities regardless of limited resources. I mean, that was my goal, was to create a way of seeing the world as full of opportunities and where limited resources weren't constraints. Because that, to me, is what entrepreneurship really is.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one way you keep yourself from spotting opportunity, and it's this dangerous thing that people talk about in innovation all the time called the S-curve. You guys know what an S-curve is? I mean, it's a curve shaped like an S, right? And the idea is that when it's a brand new idea, it's kind of starting out gradually, and then it gets steeper, and then eventually as it kind of plateaus at the end. So it's got this S. Now, there must be some training people out there in the world who keep telling people, find the next S-curve. Find the next S-curve. In fact, there's probably people in the room who've maybe even trained it or heard it in a training program. Find the next S-curve. Like you look out the world and there's a red one there. I don't like that color. There's a fancy green one over there. Like you're choosing this S-curve. But the problem is, once you see the whole S, the opportunity's gone. What does an S-curve look like at the start of an opportunity?
A dot.
A dot. Exactly, a dot. Now, everyone would love to hear that dot's going to become an incredible S-curve and I'm going to be first on it. Okay? But you can see that's impossible. And so what you need to do is adopt a mindset that these guys in front have been adopting. That is, they see something and try it. Brian, what'd you call it? What'd you say? Just start something. What was your word? Small deeds done, right? You start at that dot. And if you enjoy working at that dot, like all of these speakers have, you've lost nothing by doing the dot. And the dot may lead to a second dot, or a third dot, or 100th dot. And if it doesn't, you've enjoyed yourself. And if it was a really cool dot, we'll bring you out to speak next year. Okay? Okay, so, but if you're trying to imagine right from the start this thing that stretches all the way up to some incredible sales, you're probably killing yourself immediately.
I think that's right. I mean, what I look for is a big problem to solve. I don't really invest in businesses. I invest in people and problems. Because at the time that I invest, there is no business. And nobody can tell whether it's going to be a good business or not. And what I can tell you for sure is we're one of the most successful venture capital firms in the world, and the majority of our investments fail. And the majority of our entrepreneurs, the vast majority, I mean more than 70% of our investments will fail to return more than 1x of the amount that we put in. So basically, not give us back our money. That's 70%. And the reality is that the economics of our business allows us to take bold risks. So we're able to live off the other 10 to 20%, which really pay for success. But what's important about this is to understand that the risk you're taking, the risk of failure, is one that has sort of two sides to it. If you're daunted by failure, frankly, don't start a business. But if you are compelled by the opportunity and feel like failure is worth the risk, then you're on an adventure. Those are the companies I invest in. Those are the people I invest in.
Just to give you a little bit of background, if you're interested in learning more, first of all, Randy's book, Getting to Plan B, that's really what started us talking with each other. When was it published?
That was in 2006, I think.
2006. And what motivated, I don't know what motivated the book, I'm not going to speak for you, but there was something happening around that time. There's kind of this aftermath of the internet bubble. Some some people in the room may not even know what the internet bubble was because you
They were
moved
born right
on to
around then.
apps. You moved on to apps, but there used to be this thing called the internet, okay? And, 98, 99, everyone had this belief that every single business that was out there was going to switch over to the internet, and there'd be no other building-type businesses at all. And so people were rushing to make internet versions of every business that you can imagine, and of course, huge amounts of money were lost, and the bubble burst, and that was that. And then in the aftermath of that, there were a lot of conversations of exactly what we've been talking about today. It's not a straight path, okay? How the successful companies and people find themselves on this path where they try something, it doesn't quite work, they move another way, and how does that work? And that's why I was drawn by getting to Plan B. And at UTCC, we use another methodology which kind of builds on the same sort of thing called the 24 steps. But all of these things emphasize the fact that you try to go out, find a person, a group of people who have a problem, and then begin to try to find ways to help that person, and then grow from there. And really, it starts with finding that one person who has the problem that needs you the most. And so that's where we need to go. Randy, we have a couple of slides. I think we have 4 screenshots of 4 companies that you're working in that are actually interesting for people in this kind of the world. So I'm gonna put each of those up, and feel free to explain them in whatever level you want to explain them in.
Oh, Farmers Business Network. So a couple of years ago, I'm a contrarian investor. I hate trends, and I hate the sort of lemming effect that you find amongst investors. So I'm always trying to create a trend, not to follow one. And about 4 years ago, I began to invest in food and agriculture. In Silicon Valley, that just wasn't being done. The idea was, how could we apply technology to food and agriculture as one of the biggest industries on the planet to be able to enhance the success of farming and farmers, as well as to improve the food supply and its distribution and availability. And one of the first companies that we incubated, I incubated this with a partner of mine who went off to run it, was Farmers Business Network. And Farmers Business Network is based upon the idea of building a co-op for farmers' data. So in the US, every device that's now being sold, whether it's a tractor or a weather vane, now is collecting data for farmers. But most of that data is actually going to the manufacturer of the device, not going to the farmer, and the farmers aren't equipped to make use of it. So what we created was a company that allowed farmers to upload their data, and for essentially for free, a very small sum, and then we manage that data and begin to report back analytics to the farmers that allow them to make the best decisions around when to plant, what seed to plant, how much fertilizer to put on, when to irrigate, and to compare their yields against others so that they can see whether they're doing well or not. And that business then spins up into helping them to buy the inputs, to sell the crop. We actually manage that for them. We manage capital to allow them to hedge their crop harvests. So it's a really great business. In our first year of business, we did $40 million worth of revenue, first year. And it's growing very, very rapidly. It will be a global company. And right now it's focused on the US largely in row crops. But nobody in Silicon Valley was investing in agriculture when we did this. So I'm very proud of that trend. I actually have a couple of companies in this space now.
Great. By the way, obviously that is something that's big for us in Thailand, so lots of opportunities in that.
This was the first company I invested in, essentially with the same partner in the ag space. This is a company that owns germplasm. What they do is they, unlike Monsanto, who does genetically modified products and protects it by IP, this is a company that actually creates hybrid germplasm of produce, not row crops, on a global basis, and moves that germplasm around so that a melon that is growing really well in Lebanon can be grown here in Thailand. And in fact, they actually have experimental plots here in Thailand, as well as in China, in Amsterdam, Turkey, and the US. And this company is also doing extremely well, just brought in a very large investment from Singapore, and is also, I think they're now doing about $60 million worth of revenue in this global seed business, which I'm, again, very, very proud of because the quality of these products is terrific, and the ability to move them globally is very important to the business.
Before we go on to the next one, there's a question here that I want to ask, that somebody wants to ask you. And this is one of the few bold people who was willing to put their name up. Okay? So I want to thank Kun Pansa Rungpitia. Who is that? Can you come up here?
Uh-oh.
Yes.
This must be a heck of a question.
Because you're willing to do that, we're going to give you a signed copy of Randy's book. Thank you. Randy, I'll let you give the book to him.
Here, enjoy it.
So thank you.
Yeah.
My second copy.
Oh, is it? Okay, well, give it to this one's signed, unless it's the second signed copy you have.
Do not sell that on eBay.
So his question was, where do you do your best thinking?
On my bicycle.
Thank you.
And when?
And when?
Whenever I'm on my bicycle.
We got it back here.
I've always been
Thank
a
you.
very avid cyclist. I've cycled very many places in the world. I've cycled through Vietnam and Laos. I've cycled through Burma. I've cycled through Bhutan. I've cycled through China. I've cycled a lot in Europe, etc. So I love cycling, and to me, it's a meditation. I also meditate every day, but cycling is a different type of meditation. And I find it's incredibly powerful for me because I may get on the bicycle with just a head full of complexity, and I'll simply forget it. And suddenly in the middle of the ride, there seems to be this clarity. Things seem to be really clear, no confusion. And so I find bicycling to be a very, very powerful place for me to think. Yeah.
And while we're on that topic, actually, another named questioner. I'm going to get this out before people start spotting a trend here.
Yeah.
We
don't have that many books.
Okay. Pavel Lalatin? Come on up. So your question is, you incubate tech startups here. Okay, what's Randy's advice in getting more of this going in Thailand?
First, I have to present you with the book.
Have to present the book. Yeah, I'm not going to present.
The whole
He's gonna
process
present.
here. There's a process here. Thank you very much.
Take a photo?
Yeah. Photo. Somebody got it? Yeah. So, look, I think what I've seen in incubators and how incubators have, I think, take hold in countries, as I've watched it across Europe, for instance, and other parts of Asia, is the important thing is the quality of the talent. I mean, it's a supply-demand issue like with any marketplace. And the only part that you can control is the talent. Controlling the money side or the outcome side is not possible. So recruiting the best talent, creating an alumni network so that the talent begins to teach each other. I've seen in the best incubators, not much teaching goes on, but there's a tremendous amount of collegiality that raises the level of all ships and alumni that pull people through. And so like any great business school, it's the alumni that make the biggest difference, not the professors. And so my sense is that what you need to do is choose your students well, because what you're doing is creating your alumni.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is it your birthday today?
No, but a lot of people have been taking pictures with me, and it's been their birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whose birthday is it today?
I don't know. I've been taking.
Here's one. Here's one. Come on up here if it's your birthday. Anyone else's birthday today? Who said yesterday? Okay, we'll take yesterday.
I had a whole bunch of lovely women come up and take
Today?
a picture with me saying it was their
Come
birthday.
on up.
I thought
Okay.
that might have been excused.
I'm glad I asked before I... Come on. Do we have enough? No more birthdays. Is that it?
Yeah. Oh, here
Okay,
we go.
I will get
have
you
to
one.
present
I will get
these.
you one.
Happy birthday.
I promise.
Happy
Sorry.
And happy
John.
birthday to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ajahn Anusaran. Sorry, one more. Come on up here. Jump.
Oh,
Leap with faith.
here you go. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Back to the companies.
Oh, Juicero, this is an interesting one. This is a company that is doing for fresh produce what Keurig and Nespresso did for coffee. What they've done is they've come up with a device that allows you to cold press produce into juice, and a set of recipes that they ship you weekly that are fresh and have about a 1-week lifespan. The products are amazing. You can't get juice that tastes as good, even in the markets, because it's cold pressed and because of the recipes. And the idea is, even though this looks like a piece of hardware, the press, what it really is a supply chain business. What we're trying to do is figure out how to get fresh produce into people's homes and into people's lives in a convenient way. So if you think about, and I think there was a reference this morning to Campbell's, and if you think about Campbell's, for instance, and the way that they put products into cans, I don't know if they do it here, but in the United States, because it's the best way to get produce to people's homes, we're trying to do that in a fresh process. We'll do it for baby food, consommes, soups, etc.
Great. Actually, let me jump in with another question there from Temi Chi. Thank you for the question. Sorry, no more books, but thank you for the question. If they are the CEO of their company, is it okay if other people are better than them?
Oh, have to be. The CEO should not be the best person in the company.
Exactly.
The CEO is an enabler for the best people to do the greatest work. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago for the Harvard Business Review where I challenged Harvard Business School, because I felt that Harvard Business School and their model of education was to train bosses. And in the old model of organizations where people were the means of production, bosses made sense because bosses wanted people to simply produce the things that they were designing through the process that they put together. But that's not the way it happens anymore. People are no longer the means of production, they're the means of creation. And the boss has a different role. It no longer is the MBA the boss. Their job is to remove obstacles and enable the people who are doing the creating to do their jobs better. That's the role of management in these new companies. I call that minimally invasive management. People who don't get in the way, but enable the creative people to do their work.
I'll answer the question from my own personal experience. I have 4 companies in Thailand. The reason I'm here is because they run better without me. Okay, simple as that. A couple of questions that kind of talk about, bridge the steps beyond startups. How do you see the intersection between companies, big companies, and startups? And then we're going to take another level. What about the macro level of the country? A question from that. What about the macro? So looking at a couple of level of orbits beyond the startup, a corporation, and then the macro level of the company. The country. How do you see those fitting together?
Yeah, so large companies come to me and my firm all the time to figure out how to innovate, because they see us investing in innovative companies, so they think that somehow they can learn from Silicon Valley. And their goal is to take these innovative practices that they read about in Getting to Plan B or Lean Startup or whatever, and bring them into their companies. But that's a fundamentally flawed idea. And the reason is this. What I told you about my business is that 70% of the companies will fail. In a large company, if you fail, you no longer have the opportunity to advance. Large companies can't afford to have 70% of their projects fail. They can't afford disruptive innovation. That's not to say they're not innovating. They're always making their products better. They're always trying to figure out how to please their customer more. But disruption is not their business. In fact, it's the exact opposite of their business. And so I try to coach large businesses to figure out how to acquire and enable innovative companies rather than to try to actually mimic them inside, because I don't believe that big companies offer the appropriate culture to disrupt their own business as well as industries.
Let's take care of the one more company before I forget it, okay?
Oh, yeah. Beyond Meat. So, well, one of the biggest problems on the planet, of course, is the environment. And one of the biggest problems in the environment is meat. pigs, beef, lamb, they consume a tremendous amount of water and protein, and they actually excrete a tremendous amount of waste. It's one of the least efficient ways for us to nourish ourselves. And so in the US, we started a company called Beyond Meat to create meat substitutes that would allow people not to become vegetarians, but to begin to substitute meat, these sorts of products instead of meat into their diets on a regular basis, to begin to cut down on the carbon footprint of their diet. And this company is also doing extremely well. I'm very proud of the products. They're very tasty. I'm a pescatarian, mostly a vegetarian. I never eat meat. I've never eaten meat. So these products are not products that I necessarily designed for myself. But it's wonderful to see that actual meat eaters are beginning to substitute this for meat in their diets.
Great. So we wanted to show a couple examples of the sort of companies you're working with now, and I really wanted to emphasize it's not all about apps. Right?
Yeah.
We sometimes have this feeling that the apps are the only innovative opportunity in the world right now. I want to take you back to the last question. So we talked about the corporate part. What about the macro policy level of the country?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because everybody looks to the U.S. as sort of an innovation center. But I want to be very frank with you. Silicon Valley is a unique place in the United States. Yes, there are other innovation centers in the United States. Boston is one, New York, LA. But if you look at what's really going on in the United States in terms of innovation, it's really Silicon Valley. It dominates. And it dominates not in its proclivity to start new ventures and the amount of capital, but in its boldness and in the success rate of the companies that are coming out of there. And so when you look at a country like the US, you can't simply judge yourself by what's going on in Silicon Valley. You have to think beyond that. And I think the reason that the US is so good at innovation is threefold. The first is that it has a very large immigrant population. It always has.
Up until now.
I'd say the scariest thing right now to me about the new administration is that if, in fact, we were to cut off immigration in the United States, we'd lose our competitive advantage. Immigrants are the competitive advantage of the United States. It's the pluralism that makes the United States so successful, because that creates a very rich medium for exchange of ideas. And as Christopher said, there are no new ideas. There's only the synthesis of ideas that are out there into new products and experiences for people as technologies and other opportunities become ripe. And so it's very important to have a pluralistic environment where people can exchange ideas and challenge each other. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the U.S. measures its education all the time and feels like it's falling behind in math to the Chinese, it's falling behind in languages to the Europeans. Frankly, they all covet what the U.S. has, which is an education system that allows people to question. Because rather than having a rote system where people can become very good at math or very good at languages, the U.S. has a system where people can meander, ask questions, challenge the teacher, challenge ideas. And this, I think, is also one of the critical elements of why the U.S. innovation culture is so successful. Because it has an education system that questions authority. The third is it has a culture. It has a culture that is very forgiving of failure. Now, Silicon Valley is, I think, extreme in this regard. But nevertheless, it is possible to fail in the United States, get back up and do it again. You're not stigmatized. Your family isn't stigmatized. You're not forced to go into debtor's prison. This doesn't happen in the U.S. You fail, you get up, you brush yourself off, you do it again, you learn from failure. Quick, cheap failures. The quicker, the cheaper, the better. I think these three things are what make the U.S. a very innovative culture. And I think that these things can be incorporated into any nation's culture, but it has to be very deliberate.
So I love that answer, except for when you were talking about questioning authority, my boss was playing line and didn't hear it, but that's okay. Another follow-up question from
He follows directions well, though, doesn't he? No.
So a follow-up question from Kun Grik from the Thai Chamber of Commerce is Vice Chairman UTCC. Sorry. Is think big, act small appropriate at the government level? Okay. Now let me take that one first from some perspectives of working. Mostly Ministry of Science and Technology. I've got a lot of friends here. We've fought the system together for about 10 years, haven't we? Okay. I think we need more of it. To be honest, I'll speak very straight. I think most government policies in Thailand, maybe I don't know any other governments actually, except Thailand's government, are too big. They shoot for a moon almost every occasion because there's this need to say we're doing something as great as Singapore or somewhere else. And I actually would like to see a lot more, break those into smaller pieces and get it out into more hands. So. I won't answer that one. But that's my local perspective.
And I'll give you maybe a slightly different answer. I think it's dangerous to take the lessons of entrepreneurship and apply them wholesale to everything else. I saw this in my own career when we worked in the when I started doing social investing. And the idea that I'd been so successful at doing private investing gave me great confidence that I knew how to do social investing. And I was never so humbled as I was by trying to bring my entrepreneurial talents and experience into the social venture world. I think the social venture world is much harder than the for-profit world, largely because the institutional support isn't there. So I think you need to be careful. Now, what I mean by that is I think there are lessons to be learned, but I think you have to apply them in ways that are appropriate and not simply change the way you do things to be entrepreneurial.
And I would add, again, the definition I like, you heard earlier, is about bringing things together. It doesn't have to be a monetary measurement all the time, right? We find at a government level and a society level, we need to find other measures, which I think brings us to another step, and that is what about, I guess I'm off the thing, let me get back on. What about entrepreneurship in life? So I know that the book we've been handing out, talks about entrepreneurship beyond business. So you wrote a book on this, okay? Monk of the Riddle. Okay, let me get down to the book. Not everyone had a chance to see it. That's what it looks like. Okay. All right. Tell us about the Monk of the Riddle.
Well, this is the first book I wrote. It's an interesting story because it was 1998 in the United States, and the internet boom was out of control. Everybody was successful. Companies were being launched, taken public. People were becoming minted millionaires and billionaires overnight. And I was depressed. I was depressed not because I wasn't making a lot of money. I was depressed because the way I was making the money. These companies weren't creating any value. They were opportunistic. They were taking advantage of the moment in the marketplace to simply go out and put a stamp on themselves, make their money, and disappear. And this was very depressing to me because I love entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are heroes to me. They're people that take a risk to change the world. And these weren't the people that I was seeing in Silicon Valley. So in 1998, in the middle of the boom, when everything was going well, I decided to write The Monk in the Riddle. I had been asked to do it by Harvard, and it's a story I can tell if we had more time, but I decided to take a chance and write the book. And the book was about the spirit, the soul of entrepreneurship. It was not about how to make money. It was instead about how to create value. And I lamented what I saw as the loss of the pure creative vision of entrepreneurship. Now, what's interesting about it is, when I wrote the book, everybody told me I was crazy, everything was going well, and I was not the right person to say that the emperor had no clothes. I stopped investing in '99. Wrote the book. In 2000, March of 2000, the market crashed. Absolutely crashed. Everybody who had suddenly was worth billions was worth very, very little money. And everybody was confused as to what happened. My book came out in March of 2000. And everybody began to point to the book as the loss of the soul of the entrepreneur. Became a bestseller. I mean, it was just good timing on my part. But it's continued to be a perennial for around the world for people trying to understand what is really entrepreneurship and why is it important.
So at the time, he was depressed for making too much money. I was depressed for a different reason. So I had moved to Thailand in 1992, and I launched my first company in January 1997. So by July 1997, I was very depressed. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to starve to death in this third world country and never go home because, very, very tough time going through Thailand. And that also made me begin to question business. And that's why later on, when Ajahn Nui and I at Thammasat began to look into opportunities in social impact and impact businesses, we started looking at social entrepreneurship. And I'll put up my list of kind of, since you talked about social entrepreneurship, kind of 3 different ways of viewing. I mean, there's a million, but here's 3, okay? So first of all, there's the I'm going to change the world view, which I very much applaud, but we need to be careful about point A, right? Does the world really want to be changed the way that we want them to change, okay? Sometimes we get stuck into our own vision and we don't really know if the world wants that vision. So just like we're talking about think big, act small, experimenting in a regular business that we want to start up and grow, I think we have the same opportunity to make sure our value is right in a social enterprise. I also believe that businesses should begin to view themselves more as social enterprises. I mean, businesses have a huge social impact on all of us, right? We spend a lot of our time in businesses, in our work. We end up interacting with most of the people that we work with more than anyone else. And so businesses are social enterprises. They may not be always creating positive social value, but they have tremendous social impact. So there's an opportunity for business to be better social enterprise just by recognizing all the people they take care of, including their employees and the people living in their community. And then the third one, which I think is very, very important for the world we're living in. We can joke about the U.S. and cry about the U.S., but one of the problems in the world today is the world is seeking simpler solutions, 140 character explanations of stuff, and yet it's a much more complex world, right? So somehow or another, we need to figure out how to embrace this complexity and be willing to really talk about it rather than thinking we're going to get the solution in 140 characters, okay? Now there's one other question that came up here, which I think fits with this kind of life balance of entrepreneurship. Somebody asked, and I'll check if they put their name up there, they said, what if I'm an introvert?
Oh.
Can I be an entrepreneur?
So, believe it or not, I'm an introvert.
And so am I, actually. That's not a joke. Actually,
I am an introvert. And I think that the definition of introvert is pretty interesting. Is where do you get your energy from? If you get it doesn't mean that you're not social or not capable of being social. It means that fundamentally, if after being social you're exhausted, which I will be after this, you're an introvert. If after being social like this, you're just energized and raring for more, you're an extrovert. It's a pretty simple test, actually. But what a lot of times what people think of when they say they're an introvert is they're kind of shy, that they are reticent. And I think that's simply a skill set. I think you can learn to be more expressive. You can learn to be to extend yourself more. And you can do it in your own style. Everybody doesn't have to have the same style. I don't believe there's a winning style. I do believe that you need to be able to communicate well. You need to be able to energize other people in order to be successful as an entrepreneur. But you can do that in a quiet way, or you can do that in a loud way. You can do that in a social way, or you can do that in a personal way. So I wouldn't be worried if you feel that you're an introvert, that you are maybe shy. I think that you can learn skills to make yourself more successful in being able to communicate and lead others.
Certainly one of the things I love about working in this part of the world is when I am in the Bay Area, it seems like everyone's pitching to me. That's the way they talk normally. And I prefer a kind of normal conversation. So I don't think you need to be at that pitch mode all the time. Introvert or extrovert, it's really how you put things together. Okay? So I want to leave you with one other thought. And I'll ask you first. Do you want to leave one other thought for the room? We've got a lot of great questions, but we're going to wrap things up. I've got one last thing to say, but I'm going to give it to Randy first if there's a message he wanted to share.
Well, you alluded to it when you talked about the types of social enterprise. And in The Monk and the Riddle, I talk about this a lot, was the integration of who you are and what you believe and what you do. I think a lot of people believe that business is somehow separate from who they are as a person, that business is a game. It's about making money. Business is an institution that gives us a set of tools in order to accomplish great things. That's what it is. And frankly, if business was only about allowing people to become rich, then we don't need it. We only need it because it creates value for all of us. And those tools can be used for good or for bad. They can be missionary or mercenary. But fundamentally, I think they should be creative, of value for others. And this idea of integrating who we are and what we believe is critical to navigating that creative process. We shouldn't ever go against our principles in order to make a dollar. Yeah, we shouldn't ever try to take advantage of others in order to be successful in business. It's not necessary. It is possible to create value without forcing others to fail or extracting value from others or taking advantage of customers. And so I think we need to bring our values and principles to what we do. It's interesting to say that in a place like Thailand, because I think in this culture there is, and it probably has to do with the Buddhist ambience of this place, I think it's kind of natural in Thailand to think that way. It's not natural to necessarily think that way in a hyper-dynamic market, a Darwinian market like the United States or Europe or China. And so I think Thailand has a lot to teach the rest of the world about how to do business.
Before I thank Randy, thank you. So in a second, the MC is going to come up and we're going to give you a final thank you, but I just have one other thing to say, which is going to disrupt the room a little bit. There's one more signed copy underneath somebody's chair. Thank you very much. Thank you, Randy.